So the Delphic religion was unrivaled in power and influence for approximately 1,000 years. When people would go to get a prophecy from her, or from the priests, they would bring her gifts in exchange for her wisdom. Gifts such as giant marble statues. Yep. Now, the reason they're headless is because they were transported from Greece to London. Okay, this is from the British Museum in London. And I had a chance to go there when I was doing some dissertation research and had a day to go visit the British Museum. It's fascinating. Got to see a lot of neat things there, historical things. These were some of the statues that actually lined the road up to the Oracle at Delphi 2,500 years ago. So British historians transported them to the British Museum probably in the mid 1700s, I don't know exactly when. And some of these were the types of gifts they would bring, but not just a statue. They would bring money and other things that would increase the wealth and increase the status of the priests and the religious leaders there at Apollo's Temple in the Oracle at Delphi.
I have a question.
Yes, Nicholas.
The gases that she breathed in, were they were they on top of the mountain or like?
There's a crack in the mountain.
Crack in the mountain.
And there's actually something legitimate to that. I don't mean that it creates like an ability to prophesy the future, but there are literally gases that seep from the mountain there, and so it's possible that it's more than just a religious phenomenon. That there's something to, of course, the power of persuasion plays into that as well.
Right.
If you think something's going to happen, a lot of times something happens. And so that's part of what was going on there. But even then, it was incoherent babbling that she would spout out. Right. So she might have gone into some type of trance-like state, but who knows? I mean, I don't know whether they were kept there of their own accord, but it's a pretty powerful position to be in. And so I think they liked their power and influence, and so they enjoyed the attention and then the wealth that they received as a result of the attention that they got.
Native Americans smoked stuff too to go to the spirit world, you know.
Yeah, I mean that's not an uncommon type of religious expression. I mean there are people today that use drugs as a religious experiment. There are postmodern philosophers that have pulled that stuff too. You know, the drugs are their entry point into some type of either New Age experience or some type of religious experience. That's not something that can be just relegated in the ancient world. It happened here in this particular situation, but it's not something that only happens there. So what's the significance of this journey into Greek religion? Why are we even talking about it? Well, here's why. Context. Greek religion stems from chaos. You see this in Frame's chapter, in the chapter you read this week. In other words, the material, observable world came out of a chaotic beginning. In the Greek religious paradigm, there's only an appearance of order. Chaos is the foundational perspective. It's the foundational element within the Greek religious system. In their order, it goes chaos, cosmos, and logos. Chaos is the beginning point. Everything's disordered. It's not systematized. Doesn't fit. Doesn't make sense. Cosmos is the world as we see it. So it'd be nature. It'd be the world itself. It'd be people. That's the cosmos. Logos is what?
Logic.
What?
Logic. Logos.
Reason or logic. Yeah, close. Technically, it's the Greek word for word. It means word, but it carries the idea of reason or something that fits in the way the world works. So in the Greek religious system, the order was chaos, cosmos, and logos. Cosmos came from chaos. Logos came from the cosmos. Okay? That's the religious system's order. Second, the journey of Greek philosophy toward rationality and reasonable explanations for the universe was an affront to the classic religious system. Obviously, because when you look at that religious system, does anything function that way? Does that fit the way the world works? Can we get order and reason and logic from chaos? No, we can't. We know that, and we could go to a biblical explanation for why, but the Greek religious system and the philosophers of the classical Greek age didn't have the Bible to go back to. They weren't part of the Hebrew people. They didn't have the Old Testament. The New Testament had not been written. Jesus had not come yet. So they didn't have an explanation to work against or counteract the Greek religious system, so they came up with one on their own. And that's where you get Greek philosophy. The philosophers looked at the religious system and said, bunk. So this doesn't work. This is ridiculous. And when they said that, who do you think they offended?
The oracle.
The oracle and the priests. Why? Because, man, that was their cash cow. That was their money pit. People were coming to them to get a word from the oracle because they believed this religious system was the way the world really was. And if it was, then they needed to get a word from the oracle and interact with the gods in some kind of sense, and that was one of the ways in which they did that. Well, the philosophers came along and said, that's not the way the world works. It's not the way it fits. And early on, the philosophers were just kind of outliers. They were people who didn't really have much influence. But as you get to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, they begin to have significant influence over the minds of young people in particularly Athens, but all throughout Greek culture. And so the Greek religious system didn't really like the Greek philosophical system of the classical age. So we're going to look at some of those philosophers and see what they thought and see where they came up with their ideas. Philosophy in its search for rationality was beginning to challenge the previously held assumptions concerning the chaotic religion of the Greek world. So really what we're going to do now is explore some philosophers. Naturalism. And when I say naturalism, essentially I mean these philosophers grounded ultimate reality in nature. They believed if you went back to the baseline of anything, nature would be it. The first one is Thales. And he's important because he's the first Greek philosopher. He's the first one that we know of that actually engaged in a philosophical task in contrast to the religious system of the day. And here's what Thales argued. And by the way, you probably want to write down Thales. There are a handful of others you want to write down, but I'll tell you which ones, and of course you'll have these notes uploaded to Moodle so you can download them for yourselves to look back at. There are a number of these you will not need. We're going to look through way more than you need to write down. I don't ask you to give a list of Greek philosophers on the test. That's beyond the capacity of this particular course. But I do want to look at them illustratively for this move from Greek religion through Greek philosophy. Thales developed practical solutions to problem solving. Interestingly, he found a way to measure the height of the pyramid by waiting until the right day of the year at the right time of the day when the shadow is the exact height of a man. So he extrapolated height, the height of a man, when the shadow was exactly right, to discover the exact height of the pyramid based on its shadow. It's kind of brilliant for his day. I mean, we're talking 2,600 years ago.
So
Thales came up with that.
There's only one day of the year that he could do that? Or
Evidently, when it's the exact height. I don't know the whole details of that. I'm not a science professor, just a history professor. I'm just telling you what he did.
okay.
Do I understand what he did? No. But, I mean, who would have thought to do that, to measure height? Would you have thought to do that? I would have thought to do that. Thales is a pretty smart guy in some ways. He's the first person to predict an eclipse when it would happen. He did so the same way, kind of looking back in the annals of history to figure that out. He asked the question, what are things made of? Not chaos was his answer. He said the solution to everything ultimately is water. Ultimate reality is water. It was Thales. Ultimate reality is water. Now, he had a pupil. His pupil was Anaximander. And he said there was no water in fire, so water couldn't be the ultimate argument, ultimate element. Although he did say that all things originated from the sea. Kind of interesting how life originated from the sea and evolutionary naturalism. Kind of pull that idea out of, I don't know if they get it from Anaximander, but it's not new. The concept of an amoeba becoming a tadpole crawling up out of the water as a frog to become a monkey. That's not a new concept. Anaximander had that concept 2,600 years ago to some degree. Not the same process, of course, but everything coming from the sea, yes. But he said fire was ultimate reality. Or the ultimate element. Let's just copy that. Anaximenes is the next one. He was a student of Anaximander, and he disagreed with Anaximander. He said the ultimate element is air. So where are we at? Water, fire, and air.
That's a singing group, isn't it?
Do what now?
I said that's a singing group.
Earth, wind, fire.
Earth, wind, and fire. Yeah. He said the ultimate reality is air. Then you get Pythagoras. And those were naturalists. In other words, they connected ultimate reality to things we could see, feel, and touch. And then for a period of time, you get this role of the mind. In other words, rationalism is central. Ultimate reality isn't what we can see, touch, and feel, but it's something that we can rationalize or reason out. Pythagoras is the first one. Pythagorean theorem, mathematics. Any of you that know math? He believed mathematics held the key to the meaning of life. In my view, he's a nutcase. I don't like math near enough to study math to determine the ultimate meaning for life. He began a religious cult with mathematics as the key. So he's the first nerd. Religious nerd. He was passionate about music and discovering the mathematical regularity of the notes of music. Did you know that, by the way? Did you know math is music and music is math? Anybody in here play an instrument? Isn't that true? There's regularity to the notes. Half notes, quarter notes. You want to learn math better, learn a musical instrument. And vice versa. They build on each other. And guess who said that for the very first time? Pythagoras. Developed the Pythagorean theory. But we're going to forget about him because mathematics is the religious cult. Okay, so we're not going there. We're not following his theory. Even for you guys that like music, we're not going to hold on to Pythagoras there.
We can go to higher education and say that mathematics is against our religion.
Actually, no, because God created mathematics. It's not against our religion. It's just not, I'm not going to build a religious cult with mathematics as the key to it.
I just wanted to throw it in my face.
Well, see, even so, that would be not a universal religion. I mean, because goodness knows, some of us just don't get math. Just don't do well at math. Okay, I need a calculator.
You could also use his theory could replace the other guy's deal with the shadow. Use that theory to figure the height.
Yes, and he did a lot of that, and Pythagorean theory is still used. It's algebraic. It's algebra, isn't it? Pythagorean theory, or is it geometry?
Geometry.
Pythagorean theory is geometry. It's still used. If you learn geometry, you will use the Pythagorean theorem, which to me is fascinating. 2,600 years later, we're still using something he developed mathematically. That's you want to talk about having some sticking power. That's pretty neat.
Technically, that was used to put man on the moon.
Yeah, in some sense, yeah. I mean, we still use geometry today. When people tell you how far Mars is from the planet Earth and the Sun is from Earth, they don't get that by using a yardstick. They use math to get there. Did I just blow your mind?
That was a mind-blowing
You just
statement.
changed the whole thinking process.
They use math.
He's a tape measure.
Tape measure.
Yeah, they use one of those really cool tape
Yep.
measures.
Heraclitus. He was more interested in noticing the changes that take place between things. He said this: all is in flux, and you can't step in the same river twice.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
Yeah.
Water's always changing.
Water's always changing. You can't step in the same river twice.
Crazy.
Different water.
Remember, I used that in the story with Scott. That's where I got it from.
He was interested in the notion of becoming, not being. As other philosophers, he was interested in the movement of things and not things that are static. For him, the basis of all things is fire. Because fire is dynamic. It's always moving. It doesn't stay still. He believed there was one supreme God, and the ultimate fire was God, the ultimate fire, and God fires sparks into the humans, and those fire sparks from God are reason. It's kind of weird. For him, heat was kind of the ultimate element, or of ultimate importance. It's Heraclitus. Parmenides rejected the idea that all is change. So Heraclitus, all has changed. Parmenides, nothing has changed. So they interacted with one another. He argued that all is ultimately one, and the appearance of multiple things in the physical world is just an illusion. So one of the things that's going on with these philosophers through this period of time is they're learning from one another and then interacting with one another. They're debating one another's central premise, or not even central premise, but foundational premises to their arguments and their discussions. And you see this chronological order, by the way. We're continually moving down through history. Zeno, he said there's no such thing as motion, argued similarly to Parmenides above him. He tried to work out a rational way of understanding life, and for him, motion and change are illusions.
So really, we're not moving.
It's an illusion.
Mindset is that it's all an illusion.
It's all an illusion. Part of a world that doesn't really exist. There's a real world out there in the rational sense, but we're a part of a world that's illusory. Now, think about that's nuts.
Drive you crazy.
But hold on just a second. They're arguing this in a context when your God is Zeus, who comes down and sleeps with women, impregnates them, and then you have half-gods like Hercules. I mean, the Greek philosophical system is off, but think about what it's off in compared to. For you to be a successful person in the 600s in Greece, you needed to go talk to the Oracle of Delphi and talk to a woman who was going to have some kind of weird, incoherent babblings based on vapors that she was breathing, interpreted by a priest. Or you could believe with Zeno that those things are illusions. They don't really have it. I mean, yes, this is a little bit weird, but it's weird you think about it in its context. They're trying to interact with a world that doesn't make, in their mind of the philosophers, the world doesn't make sense in the religious system. So they're trying to explain the world from a different perspective, which is odd, but it's odd given its context. I mean, they're reacting against something that's even more odd. Leucippus is next. He was the founder of the atomist school. He believed the world was made up of small particles called atoms. We get the word from him, but his atoms don't have a proton nucleus and neutrons. In other words, it's not an atom scientifically speaking. He was able to look at it and see that, but we get the word from that. And of course, conceptually, there's something there. He gets that. The world's made up of small particles. And that's absolutely true. But not scientifically true. He's not... we stole the word. Science stole that word from him, if that's safe to say. For him, only two realities, atoms and the space between them, the void. And in that sense, he's making a case for atheism. And again, not atheism in Richard Dawkins' version of atheism, which is an atheism that rejects and reacts to Christianity or Islam or Judaism, but atheism that reacts to Zeus, Apollos, and the gods of the Greek pantheon. Okay? He's like, this doesn't fit, make sense, but he's making, in fact, many of these philosophers are making a case for atheism or for a God that doesn't exist in the Greek pantheon, if they have a God at all. So they're counteracting the gods of their own day. Democritus, he advanced the atom theory by saying different concentrations of atoms make different differences in the different realities, which again, there's some wisdom there, there's some insight there. We see that with the, with what's it called, the, hang on, blank. It's a table. Not the atomic table. Periodic table, yeah, periodic table of elements. How different things make up different things. There you go. Good job. Then you get the Greek masters And we're going to look at a handful of these. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates fought in the Peloponnesian War, and this is where you get the philosophical system that really started making waves with the religious system. Prior to this, you had some of these interacting with one another. When you get to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, you get to philosophers that were not just interacting with one another philosophically, and not just talking to their friends and neighbors, but they're interacting with the broader Greek culture. And so they're arguing for philosophy against the religious system in ways that they actually have a voice. So we look at Socrates. Now, what we know of Socrates comes from Plato. We don't have anything written directly by Socrates. We have Plato's discussions of what Socrates said. But essentially what we have from Plato, here's his basic philosophy. He believed it was possible to know the truth, and we had a moral responsibility to search out the truth. He believed truth was available to the person who would work hard. He believed to know the truth is to do the truth. His theory of ethics is knowledge equals practice. He spent a great deal of time talking to people because he wanted them to know and understand truth, especially the young men of Athens. He had what's known as the Socratic method of questioning. Anybody in here like football? Who do I want to pick on? You like football, China? So you like watching grown men tackle other grown men. You like watching grown men give each other concussions.
Not really.
But you just said you like watching grown men tackle other grown men.
I do.
Devin, you like watching grown men give each other concussions?
Yeah.
You realize the lifespan for NFL athletes is about 15 years less than the average lifespan of other people on the face of the planet?
Oh, no,
Did you know that?
They
You didn't know
signed
that?
on to
So
it.
you still like football?
Yeah.
You're still going to watch football, even though it's degenerative to people's health.
Hey, they're the ones choosing to play this sport. I'm just watching it. They knew it would happen.
Yeah, I mean,
They know
They know the consequences?
They know the consequences. I feel
Their
like.
life from
You
it.
really think that's a moral thing to do? To by your involvement in football, by your involvement in watching it, in paying for it, you are affirming them giving each other concussions and lowering their lifespan.
Why you gonna put it like that?
That's what Socrates would do. The reason he was so controversial is he wouldn't just ask a question and get your opinion. He would ask a question that led to another question, that led to another question, that led to another question. He fought in the Peloponnesian War. What in the world do you think he might have asked a question about in his day?
Why?
Do you like to go to war? And then he would have followed it up and followed it up and followed it up. The reason for his, and I'm giving you an example of what Socrates would do. I just think it's fun to do it with football. I like football. I watch football. I just think it's fun to do it with football. Okay? Do this line of questioning with football. My point is, you can see if Socrates spent every day, all day, doing that in Athens, what that might do to young people. You ask the right questions the right way, you can get an impressionable following that would shake up the system, the way the world works. And so essentially what happened, he shook up the system enough where when the men came to vote, someone made a motion to deal with Socrates to be exiled or killed. And the majority voted with the motion. To protest his decision of exile, he chose death by hemlock. Hemlock's a poison that you take, and it basically paralyzes you from the feet up. And so he sat there and died. When the hemlock finally got to his heart stopped.
How long does that take?
I don't know, a few minutes, half hour, an hour, something like that. But you talk about committed to your philosophy.
Yeah.
Then you get Plato. He was born in 428 in Athens. He was from a prominent, wealthy family. He was one that attached himself to Socrates. He founded a school after returning to Athens, which was the first European university. Center of the curriculum was mathematics. He published about 20 documents, mainly in the form of dialogue. If you've read anything from Plato, it's tough to read because it's from a different perspective, different way of writing than we're used to. I've read part of it, and it's not easy to get through. He wrote about certain things that we still deal with today. If you're in political theory classes, you deal with Plato. If you're in philosophy classes, you're going to deal with Plato, some of his ideas. One is the myth of the cave. He said, suppose human beings are living in a cave, all of us, and we're chained to the wall, and the only direction we can look out, we can see a tunnel, and all we can see are the shadows of the people at the edge of the tunnel. Because that's what we see, that's what we believe is reality. He's kind of making an analogy for the case of the way the world worked in his particular day. When someone's able to break free and see ultimate reality, he goes down and relates what he's seen. In this way, he's making a picture of Socrates, but he's also making a picture for truth. He's saying the philosophers are the ones that see the world for what it really is, not the religious system. And you can imagine that that wasn't really a popular notion among the religious people of his day, particularly because Plato had an institution. He had a university. He was actually teaching these ideas to young people who then had to deal with them. He also wrote about the divided line. We'll skip that. Talked about the theory of forms. We'll skip that. He believed in the eternity of the soul. The soul existed in form before reality. I've actually heard Christians talk about that our souls exist somewhere in God's heaven before we're born. Have you heard that? Anybody else heard that? I've heard that in Christian. You know where that comes from?
How do you feel about
Plato, not the Bible. That's how I feel about that. It's a Platonic thought. Plato isn't wrong about everything, but I don't find that in the Bible.
that? Right.
I don't think we exist till God creates us. That's my personal opinion. Because I think it's what the Bible verifies. The soul is in three parts. The reason is gold, the spirit silver, the appetite's bronze. Not surprising that the reason would be gold, the spirit would be silver, and the appetite would be bronze, right? Because that's Plato's what? A philosopher. Reason is king. Virtue in three parts. Wisdom is gold, courage is silver, temperance is bronze. Again, wisdom is a philosopher's ideal. So wisdom is gold. He thinks very highly of himself, thought very highly of himself and the other philosophers. The state is in three parts. Those who govern were gold, the administrators were silver, the craftsmen and farmers were bronze. Who do you think he thought should rule?
Philosophers.
Philosophers. Yes, a philosopher, king, methodology, or political theory, which is why you would deal with him in politics. Government were ruled by leaders who would choose for the children which class they're to be in. Plato popularized the philosopher-king theory of government. We don't have time to deal with that as much as I would like to. We'll skip on. In his cosmology, Timaeus, he drew the conclusion that the world had to be designed by an intelligence. For him, that was not God as in what we would have, but it would be a craftsman. The craftsman was a supremely intelligent mind, created what?
Order.
Out of...
Chaos.
So it's a nod back to the religious system. Before the world was made, he believed there was a matrix of refined material, absent from form, chaos. For him, the three eternal things were the unformed matter, the craftsman, and the souls. And the craftsman created order out of that. Somewhere the craftsman brought order and formed this matrix of formless material. The world had a world soul, and time began once the craftsman formed the matrix. This is where Plato, in a sense, united the philosophy, reason, and the Delphic religion. And I think he did some of that because he saw the controversy and he was trying to forestall some of the debate and controversy between the religious system and the philosophic system. Look at Aristotle. We will buzz through Aristotle. I'm trying to get us to something, and I think we'll get to it today, where we make a connection to Scripture and how Greek philosophy connects to that. So I think we'll get there. So we're going to buzz through this pretty quickly. Plus, you get these notes uploaded on Moodle, so you can look through these at your own.